Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I apologise for the slight delay. Welcome to today's meeting of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council website, and it will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Can I please ask that all members and officers have their microphone on mute until they wish or are invited to speak. I have received apologies from Mr. Gattatoria today. There are no substitutes. Item 1. The first item is the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of June, page 5 in your agenda. I move that these are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Do I have a seconder?
I have a second.
Thank you very much. Item 2 is question time. I have received a question today from Mrs. Sue Whiting. The question and its response have been circulated to members of the committee prior to the start of the meeting and will be taken as read. I would like to remind members that no discussion is to be held on this question. I now invite Mrs. Whiting to ask a supplementary question if you have one, and I would remind you that your supplementary question should clarify the reply you have been given and should not raise any new issues. Mrs. Whiting.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would like to ask a supplementary question that's from the answer and I wish some further clarification. Is the recently launched Inclusive Practice Toolkit on the Leicestershire County Council website available for parents to access, as there are many children homeschooled? And will the Dyslexia and Neurodiversity Lunch and Learn virtual event on the 9th of October also be available for councillors as well as Leicestershire County Council staff?
Thank you. Ms. Moore, do you want to come back? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the Inclusive Practice Toolkit is available for parents to access widely. It does set out the expectations of school support to meet the needs of children and young people with sense and maybe of limited use for those that are homeschooling, but indeed it is available for access by parents. And yes, the Dyslexia and Neurodiversity Lunch and Learn event can be available to councillors, and we can share with councillors how they can access that event.
Thank you, Mrs. Whiting. You are welcome to remain in the meeting if you wish, or you can leave and enjoy the sunshine. Thank you. We also have questions from members, item 3, and I've received questions from Mr. Hunt. Questions and their responses have been circulated to members of the committee prior to the start of the meeting and will be taken as read. Again, I would remind you that no discussion takes place on these questions. Mr. Hunt, do you have a supplementary question? Not at all. Thank you very much. Item 4, urgent items. I have no urgent items. Item 5, declarations of interest in respect of the items on the agenda. Does any members have any interest they wish to declare? I see no hands. Thank you. Item 6, declarations of the party whip. Do members wish to declare the party whip? No. Item 7, I have not received any petitions. So we're now moving on to the first substantive item, which is a report on recruitment and retention on page 15 to 22 in your agenda. Jane Moore, are you taking this one?
I'll hand straight over to Sharon, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Chair. The report that is before committee today is to provide an overview of our department's recruitment and retention activity. The committee has been briefed previously in relation to our strategy for recruitment and retention. So this is to provide an up-to-date account of the outcome of our activity and future objectives and actions. Paragraph 2 and 3 of the report take you through both where the departmental recruitment and retention sits and key documentation surrounding our strategy, and 3 references for you nationally, the work around children's social care workforce that's part of the reform strategy, Stable Homes Built on Love. So in relation to the national picture, there is a recruitment crisis within within social care, particularly within children's social care, and the report outlines for you some of the key findings nationally, and some surveys and some work that's been completed that tells us very clearly about the reduction in the number of people signing up for social work training, and also gives evidence of vacancies across the social care workforce, but also evidence of the time that social workers stay in frontline practice and some of the rationale and reasons that lead to people either removing themselves from frontline practice, or the trend over more recent years for people to move from permanent employment to agency work. In relation to, if we move to paragraph 14 in the report, it takes the committee through the strong and robust work over a period of time that has taken place within the department to address both the recruitment issue, but just as importantly, the retention, and how we keep staff feeling safe and supported to remain not only working and wanting to work for Leicestershire, but also wanting to remain in frontline practice, and how we ensure that experience and skill base in frontline practice. So page 18 at paragraph 15 takes you through the work that we've done establishing a strong value base, the introduction of the workforce development plan, how we have looked at workloads, worked around well-being of our workforce. The local challenge, which is outlined in paragraph 9, takes you through the detail of the increased competition, both locally and regionally, for qualified social workers. So a reduced number of workers available, and actually where we are based within the East Midlands, that easy accessibility for people to travel to Leicestershire, but also equally for them to travel from Leicestershire and be based here, but work for other authorities. It outlines within the report the work we've done to make Leicestershire a first choice employer for social workers, and it outlines for the committee the work that's been done regionally, along with our HR colleagues, to look at how we make our salaries competitive, but also we know that whilst we wouldn't want to underestimate the financial part of the people where people choose to practice as social workers, which is more challenging at the moment because of nationally the poverty and the cost of living crisis. We know that other things are important to people around where they work, and that's about having the right support structures in place, the right supervision, the right training opportunities, safe numbers of children that they support and feeling safe and in an environment where social work's allowed to flourish. So the report outlines for you the things that we've done across those areas. Paragraph 11 takes you through the activities to implement and strengthen recruitment. It takes you through the activity, not just normal recruitment activity, but the things that we have done that have established principles around workforce principles. We've looked at our welfare and well-being offer, not only the offer generally that's there from the corporate, from the department, from the authority. We've also looked at a bespoke wellbeing service for social workers, and we've looked at an additional counselling for those workers who've dealt with extremely traumatic or very difficult situations that have required them to have some space and support outside of the normal supervision relationship. As we move on, the impacts, so later in paragraph 15, it takes you through where we stand nationally around our turnover, vacancy and agency rates. You'll see that we were faring particularly well and starting to turn a curve, and then with COVID, post-COVID rather, has brought about a number of challenges, not to underestimate the impact post-COVID of the economy and some of the issues about standards of living that have meant that people have started to travel more and look outside of Leicestershire to work. So the current pressures are outlined in paragraph 18. We currently have 75 agency staff. Majority of those are covering vacant positions, but we do have a number of agency staff who support us when we have staff who may be on maternity leave or long-term sickness. And we have on occasion made an operational decision to put additional support in to areas and teams and services where we've had a particular pressure, with our aim and ambition always that we focus on safe practice and being able to meet in a timely way the needs of children and families within those areas. Positively, we've seen success from our the work that I've just outlined. We have a number of social workers that are currently going through the pre-employment checks. Majority of those are either newly qualified workers who will come to us, and that's positive, they're enthusiastic. Obviously we want to encourage people new to the profession, but they come as inexperienced workers, and we need to make sure we provide the right support for them early in their professional career. And we have supported a scheme to recruit some international social workers to Leicestershire. We have, as you'll see from the report, been successful with a number of those applicants. The note of caution is that some of those are still in the pre-employment checks, and there are added complications if they're moving from another country. So the figures within the report are accurate figures, but we need to, until they're actually physically in Leicestershire, we just need to be mindful of that. So what next is outlined for you in paragraph 23 onwards. It outlines the success that we've had around recruitment and retention. But it also outlines for you in paragraph 26 some of the defining children's social care work that we have continued to develop to put the service in the strongest possible position. And as part of that, we've developed further the family help services, which bring together in a safe way social care and our alternatively qualified and skilled workers based in children and family wellbeing, and looks at a model to support those children defined as children in need. So that is a development that will place us in a strong position to meet the requirements of the government's stable homes agenda, but do that in a safe way of making sure we've got appropriate social work oversight and involvement in that service. But it does, as in creating that service, give us the opportunity of utilising staff who aren't social workers but are appropriately skilled staff to help support us with our work with children and families. So I think that gives an overview. There are background papers with the report. I think that gives an overview about our recruitment and retention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Mr. Taylor, did you want to come in at this point? Right, I have a number of hands. I have Mr. Frisbee and Mr. Martin and Mr. Hunt. Mr. Frisbee.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Sharon. That was really useful. Lamentably, my sister has just stepped away from being a social worker because she found the pressures. I don't need to reiterate or be anecdotal about that. The question I'd like to ask, and I quite anticipate this might come back at a later date, is are we aware of any schemes or opportunities that are available for professionals who are looking to redirect their career aims? For example, I have friends who are leaving the health service but are looking at things like perhaps going into social work or indeed teaching. I know in certain professions like the legal, there is conversion papers that you can do so you don't essentially have to go through the whole process of the undergraduate programme. But is there anything there to expedite or facilitate people just retraining and refocusing their career aims to actually backfill some of these much needed opportunities? Thank you, Chair.
I guess there are three parts to that answer. One, there are staff within the service who apply for and are supported through the apprenticeship route to become social workers. So I'm mindful that that is training, and you've said a speedier training, but I just want to mention that because we do as a service support appropriately a number of staff each year, and have done for the last 3 years to get into social work. And we're seeing from last year, seeing those people now coming through and being able to practice. There is a step up to social work scheme, course, training. I would have to provide further details later about what's classed as a relevant background qualification of people, that whether that's a speedier way to transferable skills to get the qualification in social work, but that is available, and that is something that is there. And then we have a number of staff who join us as part of Frontline. So they are people that, and I've met our new cohort this morning, so they are people that they've already done a degree, they may have come from a variety of backgrounds that they were describing to me today, and they apply to that national scheme. That is a quicker, a speedier route into social work. You've obviously got a degree, and you do your first year with Frontline with accelerated work and support from them in training, but you're actually based within an authority and gaining that hands-on experience as well. But they take people have to apply to that scheme, and you have to have a degree of a certain level to do it. But in relation to the step up to social work, I'm happy to bring further detail about that if it would help.
Sharon, as a independent career service that I run in Melton. That would be if you could send that, because we do get asked, but sometimes it's quite a bit of a minefield. People are slightly bamboozled about how to access certain careers or vocations. So if you could send me anything, we'll do everything we can to help facilitate those people into those roles. Thank you, Chair.
Taking up Mr. Frisby's point, I think it would be useful for a lot of us. I mean, particularly these days, if we could have a link, Sharon, of some of these things, because people do change career and often have a degree, but want to change it almost completely out of that degree into something new, or are coming from other forms like Mr. Frisby's mentioned, other careers, teaching, armed forces, anything like that. So if that could be made available for us, that would be really appreciated. Thank you. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I've got questions on point 14 and point 19. On 14, it states that there is a 3-month analysis of messages that is presented to senior managers on the exit interviews. What are the key themes that come out of them exit interviews? I know I've worked in the public sector for many years, and normally what I've found it's normally around workload, the culture of the workplace, and the support that is given. Are these key themes that are coming out of the exit interviews, and what are we doing to improve them? The second question on point 19 is around the new starters to LCC, which is fantastic. The new starters from abroad is a really, really positive move, I think, but obviously there is a unique element of the legal system of the UK, where social workers need a firm understanding of the Children's Act, Mental Capacity Act, Equalities Act, Children and Families Act and the Care Act. What are we doing to ensure these people really do grasp the unique system in the United Kingdom and Leicestershire? And then also with the new starters that are fresh from their university degree, what support and mentoring are we putting in place for these people? Because obviously now we've got them, we want to keep them, and keeping them as firm employees of Leicestershire will benefit Leicestershire children. So yeah, I'd like to see what we're doing for them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. In relation to the exit interviews, they are shared, just for clarity, they are shared on an individual basis with that person's line manager and next line up. So if there are individual things for a person, they can be addressed very quickly. The thematic reports that come to us as senior management team, overwhelmingly, we don't see many people leaving us quickly. We see that people have been with us for a period of time, and actually overwhelmingly people talk about being very positive about Leicestershire as an employer, and that they would be happy to return if appropriate opportunities came up in the future. I know they're still leaving us, but that is positive that people are leaving with that view of Leicestershire, not leaving because they're running away from something. Predominantly the people that are leaving, we have a number that are leaving for promotion opportunities. That's a smaller number, but we do have a number that leave to become agency workers, and that's linked to the financial rewards and benefits that are there, that the agencies can provide, that as a local authority we're not in a position to provide. So that is one of the key themes. Sometimes there are reference to workloads, but we also have very monthly reports on workloads and where the pressures are, and we try to unpick that with individuals as to whether it's the number of children that they're supporting or whether it's the complexity of the children that they're supporting. And sometimes people want to or need to move because they feel that they are drained in a particular area. We do exit interviews for, or offer them for everybody. So somebody moving from one team to another would still have an exit interviews. So some of those people and some of that feedback are for people that have moved within our service. So they remain in social work, but they may have moved from our locality team to our children in care team, or to a specialist fostering and adoption team. So that's in relation to the exit interviews. And when the report, the thematic report, comes to SMT, we look in detail at any action that we need to take and follow that up and feed that into the recruitment and retention work that I've outlined for you. In relation to the international social workers, we are working with an agent to make sure that the relevant checks, etc., are done for those people that are moving to this country. We do, interestingly, have a number who are applying through the normal portal arrangements. We have developed an extensive package of support for them, both on a practical level of moving to a new country and establishing yourself in a new country and a different culture. But during the first 3 months that they are here, we have built a programme that will link them into some of the training for our newly qualified staff that I'll come on when I answer that part of the question, describe in detail. But that takes them very clearly through the legislative requirements of this country and anything that needs to convert. So for the first 3 months that they're here, that's a really intensive programme of work that we're invested in, and they have a reduced caseload and number of children to support during those 3 months. So it's very intensive. It's an intensive support from the local authority, but it's seen as a way of us ensuring that we can move towards, over time, having a more permanent workforce. And then in relation to our newly qualified staff, when a social worker first qualifies, their first year in practice is an assessed year in practice. So during that year, they will have a reduced number of children that they support. We have a very detailed delivery programme that is provided by Learning and Development, and they are provided with an education mentor. It's a programme that actually is assessed nationally, and we've had very, very positive feedback about the quality of our programme during that year, as well as doing a lot of on-job learning alongside their team colleagues, and with additional supervision. They also attend a number of training days that help them get to the best possible position. That first 12 months in practice, I'm sure everybody in any profession would say, that's where you really learn to put what you've learned at university into practice, and is a crucial year. So we support and have a very detailed programme of support for our ASYEs.
Thank you very much. I just think it's really great that we're welcoming people internationally. As someone who works in the NHS, some of the most amazing doctors and nurses I work with are from abroad. So I just wanted to say it's absolutely fantastic. With the use of agency, do we have enough mentors to be providing these services for the newly qualified in terms of support levels?
Yes, yeah, we ensure that everybody has got a mentor. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just before I move to Mr. Hunt, when you say people that are leaving and they give the reason, can some of it also be because they're relocating, and can it also be for more flexibility? Does that often appear as well?
It can be the case for some people that they're relocating. I guess I was trying to pull out what are reoccurring themes. So for some individuals, it will be about relocating. It's quite often for those that go to agency, the flexibility, because the amount that they earn will allow them, if they want to have periods of time when they don't need to work, and sometimes people choose that.
Mr. Hunt.
Thanks very much. Yes, the report is so thorough, and we are clearly doing everything we possibly can to be in a better position. What struck me was what the root cause of this is. I mean, we're familiar with no GPs, nurses in short supply, someone told me the other day they couldn't get a solicitor. Is it just there are not enough people in the country coming out of universities? I mean, what are they doing? Are they not choosing to go into public services, or what's the root cause?
I think yes to most of what you've said. There are fewer people that are going forward to train. And we are pushing the government for a national campaign, as there have been previously for nurses and for teachers, to have a campaign to recruit social workers. So there are fewer people going in, and I think that the actual pressures of the role and the difficulties and complexities that social workers deal with, that quite often people after a few years want to move into maybe another part of social work. Because some people remain within the social work profession, but they won't be in the frontline child protection work. I think the average is some research that's been done by the British Association of Social Workers is saying that on average, practitioners stay in frontline child protection work about 5 years.
I would understand if they're all going to some private practice, you know, where they can, but it's not a question that new graduates, we're churning them out from university all the time at great expense and so on. They're just not making the choice to go into social work, are they? And it's the same in the adult services as well. I'm just puzzled at I mean, is it that people don't see public service in the same light anymore?
I think the issues are that the challenges are there. There are other ways that people can earn more money with less stress and challenges, but we shouldn't underestimate the pull that the agency market has had. So, you know, that is pulling a lot of people that are in frontline practice but aren't signed up to or committed to one authority, and that presents us with a big challenge.
Thank you very much, Sharon. I think also one of the other reasons, a lot of children or young people now do not want to go to university. It's expensive. A lot of hard work. A lot of them, I know a number of children, including my own grandchild children, who would rather leave school at 18 and go into some form of internship, apprenticeship, rather than go to university. I have two further people, Mr. Leon Hedgenicolo, and then Mr. Welsh, and then Mr. Frisby.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I'm not going to ask a question. I'm going to answer a question, because I have been working in the NHS since 1989. I was working in the NHS before they introduced the managers. I saw the first manager coming to the NHS in 1996, and I was in St. Mary's in Paddington. Right, what has changed in the public services? And I fully agree with your comment. People do not really want to go to universities now, because every year they have to pay £9,200. And by the end of the medical school, if they go to medicine, they are already in debt of approximately £45,000, etc. But it is actually the bureaucratization of the system. The NHS today, it is obvious to all of us, it's actually a massive bureaucratic structure. It doesn't have anything to do with the NHS we used to experience back in the 1990s. And actually, there is a massive outflux of employees. We have seen actually scores of nurses leaving. They, as you said, they can make actually possibly less money, but with less stress, less bureaucracy, less scrutiny. So we have made the public services, including the NHS, a place where people actually are working on eggshells and they look over their shoulder. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Welsh.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I can ask the lead member what her view is on discrepancy between agency costs employment costs and what we're paying. Is it not something that we could deal with at a stroke?
Very simple answer is we can't even match what other local authorities with golden handshakes are offering permanent staff. So there's no way we can match the agency fees that people want to charge, and we're held by the guidelines for public sector pay scales and all that sort of stuff. So we're not in a position to offer anyone, you know, a fantastic wage to come and work for us. We're just not in that position.
Thanks, Deborah. Really helpful.
Mr. Frisbee.
Thank you, Chair. Similarly to my colleague, Leon, a bit of an answer rather than a question, really. As a careers advisor, social work has considerably dropped off discussions I have with young people and undergraduates as a vocational destination, largely because of the way the profession was, in many ways, rightly or wrongly, I'm not going to get into the politics of this, demonised by things around the Baby P case. It has literally scared people off. They feel that it is a job that has unsurmountable accountability, responsibility. They look at the pay scales, what they're asked to do, what they could end up facing in terms of standing around in a coroner's office. We do encourage young people to look at social work, particularly if have those inherent set of skills, but they simply say, no, it looks like a terrifying landscape to get involved with. So it's been in many ways deglamorised. I know my next point is probably too big for this forum, but it goes back to those all-important tuition fees that we're talking about. I just think it's absolutely ridiculous that we are trying to import, although it's needed, and we have import labour from abroad. I can see the value of it, and in the same way we have ridiculously high tuition fees that put learners off actually pursuing that vocational area. Surely isn't there recognition from the government or governments? Wouldn't it be better to say we will give you reduced tuition fees or no tuition fees to train those all important people we need, like doctors, surgeons and social workers? And until we actually take down that financial barrier, I think we're always going to be in this circle. Surely those vital skills that we need should be challenged at a government level to really say, can we not kind of do something around this, make discrepancies? I just find it very odd that we're charging young people up to £80,000 to train to be a doctor, and then we think it's a good idea to actually advertise for labour abroad. Is there nothing we can do to lobby, discuss, or just make education more affordable? Thank you, Chair. Thank you, team.
Thank you. Jane Moore.
Yeah, just to come back on that, I agree, and we know it's a pressure for young people in terms of going into university to pursue a career. I think we're fortunate in social work in the sense that there are a number of other ways of accessing social work without having to go to university. Not many, and probably not enough, but it is a significant issue. Part of what Sharon's described around the kind of national campaign is probably where we need to get to, where we are reinvigorating the kind of joy of social work, because there is enormous pressure. Some of those national issues, some of the murders of children have had a really negative impact on social workers and created a real pressure for our social workers. But actually, you know, social work is an amazing career where you change people's lives, you change children's lives. So I think that, you know, the point Sharon made around the national campaign is absolutely where we need to get back to encourage people into social work. So we do have apprenticeships. So we take a number of our non-qualified staff through, you know, in their working lives into being qualified social workers. And we've had, you know, quite a few of those now come through and are now working for us as qualified social workers. And we have frontline students who come to us and train and work and get their qualification on the job. So there are a number of things. Just on the agency issue, and I know we covered it in the report, really importantly, the National Review of Social Care did explore and really shine a light on this issue around agency and the issue of essentially agency pay that means that people are choosing to move into agency work, and that issue did hit at the same time as cost of living rise, where the need for money became more important than some of the other things that we know people want. That national review is really crucial. The consultation on social work and agency use did end at the end of the beginning of the summer, sorry, and we're waiting for the government to come back to us to say this is the things that we're going to take forward that will help us manage that agency market. And if indeed some of those proposals do go ahead, it will revolutionise and really change the way in which we can then recruit social workers, how we can limit the agency pools, how we can limit what agencies charge. So we're optimistic about that, but are yet to hear back from the government around what they do. And I guess the other bit is that we're operating, and as Mrs. Taylor pointed out, we cannot and we will not offer the kind of high levels that agencies are looking at in terms of the hourly rate. We can't. Leicestershire doesn't have the money to be able to do that. But there is national pressure at the moment where all local authorities are kind of looking for agency staff. And partly what we're doing in Leicestershire is making sure that we've got the right environment that people can flourish in, including agency staff as well.
Thank you, Mrs. Taylor.
Jane did just slightly touch on what I want to say. It's obviously been a bit negative, some of the about social care work, and I just wanted to highlight that there are people that still want to do it, still have a passion for social work and want to dedicate their lives to helping children and families. And we have a lot of those workers and staff here that we fully support. So I think we just need to have a bit of balance here, that it's a vocation, it's a life choice that people make to come into social work. And we have some fantastic social workers, agency and employed here. So just a slight, so we get a bit of balance today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Chair. My question was more linked in the start and the end of the report, because towards the end it says, in terms of recruitment, we're looking more for more experienced caseworkers that can manage complex cases as well as managers. We've also quite rightly highlighted in terms of recruitment, it's logical that if you have a career where you can train and get more experience, take on more responsibility and get paid more as well, you're more likely to stick with it and stay there. It's linked slightly already, and I'm sure you've already picked up on it with this ECF, the Early Career Framework, that's now going to be a 5-year project, it seems, rather than 12 months. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on what the ECF will be.
I can't expand a lot because it's still very much part of national consultation about how that framework will actually look and work around social work. And it's something that's being looked at as along with some pathfinders. So the detail will come to us, and we will be part of discussions. What I can say is that both Jane and I attend national forums to talk about these things, so we do have an input to them. And as soon as there is more detail about them, I can obviously share those with the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add a little bit to what Sharon said, I think the benefit of the Early Careers Framework is that it is about a kind of additional investment in how we grow our social workers. So whilst, as Sharon's absolutely rightly said, we don't know the detail of it, but actually it's about saying, how do we make sure that we continue to invest in social workers and grow their expertise? I think the challenge that we have, and you've rightly pointed out from the report, is that when we recruit social workers, they tend to be those that have come from university or newly qualified social workers. So part of the Early Careers Framework is not only getting those social workers into a continuous learning framework where we're developing them all, but it's actually about how we retain social workers as well, so that we do have a really mixed pool of people with varying degrees of experience, but a really vast range of skills as well.
Thank you very much. I see no other comments. I'd like to thank Sharon particularly, but also Jane and the whole team. It's been a fascinating discussion. I think it's one we're all very aware of. And I think it's also, the public start to need that social work is not, oh, they're a social worker. It is a career that it should be highly valued because of the work they do. So I see no further on that item. So we'll move on to item 9, which is the report on Leicestershire school buildings, which is pages 23 to 28. I think Jane Moore, the director of it, and we're also joined by Ted Walker, head of strategy, and Steve Grant, head of operational property and facilities management. So welcome. And some of the councillors, all councillors have received a briefing note as well on part of educational building. But so Jane, if you'd like to start off, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the report that we've set out on page 23 gives an overview of Leicestershire school buildings, including the roles and responsibilities of the local authority and academy trusts. And if I may, Chair, at the end, I will talk a little bit about reinforced aerated concrete as well at the end, if that's okay. So the committee is having this paper in order to give an opportunity to consider the assurances that are available to members regarding the safety of school buildings across the council and particularly within their divisions, and also to understand the process for how to raise safety concerns or questions. So by way of background, as of August 2023, there are 282 schools in Leicestershire. 72% of those are academies and 28% are local authority maintained schools. And you can see in paragraph 4 also the breakdown of those at which are secondary and those are primary and special. The council's responsibility for school buildings is dependent on whether they are part of an academy trust or an academy or are maintained by the authority. In terms of local authority maintained schools, Leicestershire County Council is the responsible body. So it's responsible for assessing the condition of maintained Leicestershire schools. They're inspected every 5 years, and the inspection information is then used to plan the maintenance required to the buildings. In terms of academy trusts, they are publicly funded schools which operate outside of the local authority control. And the trust, either the multi-academy trust or indeed the academy itself, is the responsible body. In terms of the land on which academies are previously maintained schools, is usually held by the relevant academy trust on a long-term lease model, and that's typically over 125 years. So academy trusts are responsible for managing that school estate strategically and also maintaining their estate in a safe working condition. And the DFE, through the Education, Skills and Funding Agency, is responsible for the maintenance of academy buildings, and that predominantly relates to ensuring there's funding available for the maintenance of academy buildings. The responsible body is the Academy Trust in that respect. And as a council, we don't have a role in the statutory assessment of those buildings or the condition of those buildings. But the Ofsted inspection process could also highlight some of the health and safety concerns in terms of the impact of the estate condition on the effectiveness of teaching. So there are other ways in which health and safety concerns can be raised as well. In terms of estate management, I've detailed in paragraphs 8 to 10 what we mean by building conditions and what aspects of building condition issues are identified in condition survey. Condition is categorised as we've outlined in paragraph 10, and the priority of remedial action is also prioritised as set out in paragraph 11. In terms of maintained schools buildings, Leicestershire County Council has a record of the condition of maintained schools, and that includes those sites that have been identified as having building elements in categories C or D, so that's poor and bad condition. And over the last 2 years, we've had about 6.6 million of grant funding that's been invested into projects, including things like new roofs, boilers, windows. And this year, we'll be spending a further 3.7 million on similar programme of improvements. We also continue to make continuing improvements to things like fire safety, Legionella risk and asbestos remediation, and that's all part of the Council's annual maintenance programme as well. Paragraph 14 then sets out what we've got scheduled over the summer period for 2023. And in addition to this, there are about £600,000 worth of compliance and improvement works that are planned this year. And you can see we've detailed there what are some of the things that this includes as well for our maintained schools. In terms of the work around Academy Trusts building maintenance, as I said, Academy Trusts are the responsible body for the maintenance of their schools. The local authority doesn't hold the information around the condition of academy schools, and queries around the condition of schools who are academies or part of multi-academy trusts can be raised with the appropriate trust to gather the information. And then the capital is allocated to academy trusts to make the changes that are needed through the DFE, as I said before, the Education Skills and Funding Agency, and the trusts are responsible for then addressing the defects that have been identified. We do offer facilities management and property maintenance support to academies and through a traded subscription, and there are currently about 39 academies that subscribe to this scheme across the county. What we've then done is set out some information around Leicestershire schools that are benefiting from some of the DFE capital programmes via two schemes, the Conditions Improvement Fund and the Schools Priority Rebuilding Programme. So you can see in paragraph 21, there are 38 projects that have been agreed now across 31 schools. All of those projects are connected with building replacements, so things like fire safety and structural repairs as well, and they'll be delivered by contractors who are appointed by the individual trusts. And all of that information is publicly available on the DFE website. The second scheme is the Schools Priority Rebuilding Scheme. This is the scheme that carries out some of the major rebuilding and refurbishment projects that are required across schools and sixth forms across England. There are a mixture of total replacement of buildings and some refurbishment to deliver the schools that make sure that they are fit for purpose. And you can see in paragraph 22, we've listed the 5 schools in Leicestershire that have been selected for some of the Schools Priority Rebuilding Scheme. There is some further detail on the website around what's expected there. And then if I may, Chair, I'll just move on to talk a bit about the reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete as well. So members will be aware, and I circulated a briefing on Friday with more detail, that on Thursday last week, the Department for Education published some updated guidance around the reinforced, or RAC as I'll call it. The guidance was for those who are responsible bodies for schools across England. The guidance was changed really to advise responsible bodies to vacate those unrestrict access to spaces with confirmed RAC. So there was a slight change in the guidance, which meant that some immediate action needed to be taken on Thursday. And those spaces, the guidance set out that those spaces should remain out of use until appropriate mitigations are put in place, even where they would have been deemed non-critical previously. So some of these schools had an assessment and there were mitigations in place, or it had been deemed non-critical, but the guidance changed to suggest that those areas needed to be vacated or at least restricted access. This meant that, and you members will have seen in the media, that there were 156 settings in England with confirmed RAC that were required to close. There were 52 already with mitigations in place, so 52 that had already identified RAC and had either vacated the school building or indeed had put some safe mitigations in place. And there were 104 more contacted on Thursday to inform that they needed to have mitigations in place before the beginning of term. Obviously, it wasn't before the beginning of term for Leicestershire. Our schools went back on Tuesday. However, no Leicestershire schools were contacted on Thursday to identify the need to be closed. Just by way of reminder and a little bit of detail as well, RAC's a material that is used in buildings between 1950 and 1990, and I detailed in the paper the ask from the DFE back in 2018, or indeed they made building owners aware of this component failure within RAC in properties, and then in May 2019 they alerted the responsible bodies to the potential risks from such construction, and that was as a result of some panel roof construction collapsing without any notice in a school that was operating. Since then, DFE have been made aware of a number of other collapses of RAC panel roofs that did appear to be in good condition, but unfortunately were not. So back in March 22, the DFE asked all responsible bodies to undertake a survey questionnaire to identify whether there was any RAC in their estate. The survey was subsequently extended in December 22 to all further education colleges and nurseries. And the DFE was very clear it required responsible bodies to take action and indeed complete the survey. We, Leicestershire County Council, did undertake a review of all of its school buildings that were built between that period, for which we're a responsible body for, which is the maintained schools, and the assessment showed that we had not discovered any RAC within our maintained schools. So just wanted to share that as an additional element to the paper as a result of the recent media attention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Did Mrs. Taylor or our expert here, Mr. Walker or Steve, want to add anything before I open it up to discussion? No. Who's that? Karen. Oh yes, Mrs. Yeah. Mrs. Lewis, did you have a question?
I did. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jane, for your report, which was very helpful and timely. I think it's worth noting that not all maintained schools are under the responsible body coverage of the local authority. Voluntary aided schools are under the diocese is the responsibility in partnership with governing bodies for voluntary aided schools. And should members or any other councillors wish for any assurances about any voluntary aided schools, they are very welcome to contact me. And also voluntary controlled schools, whilst the local authority remains the responsible body, they are usually within the ownership of the diocese, and the local authority work in partnership with us when addressing issues in voluntary controlled maintained schools. I'd also note that the Department for Education makes a grant available to the diocese in respect of its voluntary aided schools as we exercise our responsibilities as responsible bodies. And a point of just clarification on the paper about the schools rebuilding programme. Rawlins Academy, the responsible body is actually Embrace Multi Academy Trust. And finally, not all church schools, well, not all maintained schools, or not all schools that convert to become academies are leased by the local authority. If they are church schools, they are made available to the Academy Trust through a process called a church supplemental agreement. So in some ways, I'm slightly concerned at the lack of reference to church schools and the management of buildings and the differences and the nuances that relate to church schools. I'm slightly disappointed that that hasn't been referenced in the report, and would be happy to speak to officers subsequently about that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Did anybody want to come back at the moment from the officers?
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. That is really helpful. And apologies for the misquoting of the certainly the Rawlins School. I take that direct from the website, but know that Embrace is a responsible body. So apologies for that. But also apologies for not including the responsible body around the voluntary aided schools. What I will do is I'll contact you in the same way that I have been doing with the responsible bodies who are academies, just to seek assurance about the survey completion. So that's really helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And again, to reassure members, for maintained voluntary aided schools, the diocese has undertaken all the surveys requested by the Department for Education, and are working very closely with the church academies that have been identified this week. We were notified on Friday of the church academies that were on the list that are in the authority, and we've been working very closely with the department and with the academies concerned, and I'm very happy to keep Jane and her team updated about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I just ask a question? I should probably know the answer, but I don't. Is the other religious schools, I'm thinking of our friends, I know they're mainly in Leicester City, but do we have any in Leicestershire? And what authority would they come under? Are they any of which is our responsibility? Thinking of the Asian community particularly, or other religious.
So this guidance covers publicly funded and supported schools. Those would come under what we would class as independent schools. So they're not part of the kind of scheme that both Carolyn and I have referred to. I think, and Steve may be able to help out here, that obviously there is, and you will have seen in the media, that there are a whole raft of buildings that are affected by RAC. And indeed, it would be incumbent on those who own buildings or are certainly responsible for buildings to make sure that there is not RAC present. And I would assume that our independent schools would fall into that category, but Steve may be able to advise in terms of the kind of wider buildings issue.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd agree with Jane. I think the responsible body for day-to-day control of the premises it's their responsibility to make those checks.
Thank you very much. I have Mr. Martin. And
thank you, Chair. Really great news that none of the Leicestershire maintained schools. As a school governor of one of them, I'm really pleased that that's the case. I understand that the responsibility of the MATs and the independents are held with them, but obviously we have the responsibility of the education of special needs children through their educational health and care plan. We place obviously thousands of children within MATs and within independent special schools across Leicestershire and beyond. What do we know the figures of them schools, whether they have any RAC, as it's called, in them, and what's our contingency planning? Because I think, one of the things that COVID taught us is that contingency planning and the capacity to implement them is pretty much everything in these sort of crisis things. What's our contingency planning for the implementation of Section F of their educational health and care plans if these schools that aren't the maintained schools, i.e. the MATs and the independent special schools, have this issue? And how are we going to give these children the education that we need to give them? Thank you.
Jane Moore.
Yeah, thank you. So just to clarify, there are currently no Leicestershire schools with RAC. That includes academies, the voluntary aided schools and maintained schools that have needed to close. So that's the current position within Leicestershire. So when I've set that out in the paper, also made so that doesn't just cover maintained schools. So we currently have no schools in Leicestershire with identified RAC who have had to take mitigating action to deal with the RACs. That's across academies, multi-academy trusts, our special schools and our maintained schools. Now, there are a number of independent schools, obviously, that don't come under the kind of criteria that the DfE have used to send out the surveys, and those schools still have responsible bodies. So the the kind of head teacher or the owner of those schools is absolutely responsible for ensuring that those buildings are safe and that indeed they've done the surveys that the DfE are requesting. So that's the position in Leicestershire. And apologies, I wasn't clear enough that that doesn't just relate to maintained schools. That is all schools in Leicestershire at the moment. In terms of the implementation of education, it's a potential challenge if a school does have to close down, and that would be a potential challenge both for those children with special educational needs, but also in us fulfilling our Section 19 duty to make sure that all children are in school as well. What we would need to do, should the scenario arise where we are having to, or one of the responsible bodies is having to close a school because of RAC, we'll take the kind of same process we did during COVID, which was around having a look at either, well, it would be different from COVID because we could look at exploring other buildings that we could use. We can look at other kind of mitigations that we can put in place. What we wouldn't know is how long schools would need to close for. So there may be, only needs to close for a bit in order to put some mitigations in, or it could be that they need to close, as is the case in the city that we've seen. They need to close for some time and those children would relocate. So at the moment, we're not having to plan for any of that because we don't have any schools that are closed. But should a school be identified that does need to close, we would then need to look at where else we can educate those children so we can fulfil exactly what you've set out.
Do we feel comfortable in our contingency planning for that scenario? I know another place in the report states that obviously the negative impact that COVID had on children coming out of education, and that's obviously not what we want. Do we feel our contingency planning for if this happens is robust, and do we have the capacity to implement it, at the sort of pace that we feel would be acceptable for the children?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges is that we're not currently in a position where we can be clear about what we're contingency planning for, because it could be by the end of this process there are no schools identified and our children can continue to be educated in the building that they're currently being educated in. What we are doing and what we have been doing is looking at what the available capacity is within kind of either other schools or what buildings are available. So we are kind of working on it, but we're doing it in a way that we can't predict it, we can't project it, because we genuinely don't know whether there will be any schools identified. At the moment, pretty much all of our schools have responded to the survey. The academies and certainly the maintained schools have done everything we need them to do. So we're confident at the moment that there aren't any schools that are identified. But should that be the case, then we will have to find other buildings for those children to be educated in and look at what's available.
Did any of the other officers want to come in at this moment? No. Okay. Mr. Hill and then Mr. Hunt.
Sorry, Jen, you've already slightly answered this question, but just for clarification, I appreciate some of the part of the question is not within your remit necessarily, because we're talking about academies here, so it doesn't necessarily fall under maintained schools. But you said no schools that we know of have RAC in right now. Am I right in saying then that all the academies have done their tests? I don't know if you can answer that at all, just to start off with.
So it's slightly complex because we don't know how many, because we haven't had the updated information from DFE, so we don't know exactly how many are still due with their kind of RAC surveys essentially. So at the moment, based on the information that's been shared back by the responsible bodies, we have had no schools that have needed to close with RAC. So based on all the information that's been returned, all of the surveys that have been undertaken, there has been no buildings across Leicestershire schools that have been identified. However, and again, that's been reported in the media, there are a number of schools who are still to either complete their surveys or have a survey done. So there's a kind of desktop exercise that they would first do, and that may trigger the need for somebody to come in and actually have a look. So there are a number of schools who haven't completed that yet. Now, if those surveys then identify RAC, then we may be needing to move into the position of putting mitigation in or indeed closing schools. And at the moment, we're confident that a good majority of Leicestershire schools, academies and maintained, well, all of the maintained have done it, academies have completed their surveys, but there are a number still outstanding, as has been set out by the Secretary of State over the last couple of days.
Okay, so right now we don't think there's any with RAC, but possibly there could be. And just to clarify, I think the paper said that all maintained schools have already done that, haven't they? And we're not concerned right now unless the government changes the guidelines, which doesn't help, does it? But yeah, okay, thank you, Jane.
Yes, so just to clarify, all of the maintained schools have been surveyed and there is no RAC.
Thank you. I have Mr. Hunt and then I believe I have Mrs. Lewis. Did I see a hand up, Mrs. Lewis?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Can I just take Mr. Hunt?
Oh, yes, it was on that same point, but don't worry, I'll wait.
All right, Mr. Hunt says, would you like to go first and then he'll come in?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Yes, just to support Jane's reflection there on that point, the information coming out has been very fast-paced and it's been very challenging to get absolute clarity on what the data is telling us. In relation to the church academies that I'm aware of, there are some on-site surveys that are required to be taking place this week in order to clarify the RAC situation. But it has been quite a tumultuous few days for those of us working in school buildings. It's been quite challenging, and also any school or academy that was identified as being on the list which is requiring more information has been given a named DFE caseworker who they have been working closely with. Hope that helps and adds further to Jane's point. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve, isn't it? Yes, thank you.
it was just a matter of clarity, really. The survey I think Jane was referring to is a questionnaire that the DFE sent out. So I think the responses to the questionnaire may raise further queries. So I think that the survey on site is obviously, if there are further queries or uncertainty, then there is a survey that's undertaken, an inspection on site. So I think, just so you're aware, when we talk about surveys, the questionnaire is what all schools had to fill in. And we've had to do it for our maintained schools. We've had to fill that in for every school. There's a number of questions it asks you about the age of the buildings and that type of thing.
Mr. Hunt and then Mr. Welsh.
Thanks, Chair. I never realised that structural engineering could be so fascinating and concrete along with it. And I can anticipate that there will be hundreds of graduates coming out to be structural engineers. Unfortunately, not social workers. Anyway, this report has come partly out of a question that Amanda Hack put down a few months ago, and it's all the more valuable for that. I don't want to talk about RAC particularly because I think a lot of it's been said, and the excellent communication we've had from the officers have filled in a lot of the gaps. But I mean, it's noticeable that the report says nothing about RAC, doesn't say anything about anything's reinforced. There's even no mention about concrete. And I think what that tells us is that, first of all, this has crept up on all of us quite suddenly, but also that risks that are present in our public buildings, particularly schools in this case, aren't always in the public domain and aren't always as discussed as they might be. I'm thinking about, I think about 30 years ago, I think Mr. Grant may have some memory of this, although he's probably too young. There were several schools in Leicestershire closed because of a concrete-related structural, and they were then rebuilt and replaced and so on. I think one was in Shepshed, but that's just my memory. We hear of teachers being affected by asbestos in schools. Now, I'm assuming that we have a programme of removing asbestos from all our buildings. I'd just like to be sure of that, or whether it's only when it's deemed sufficiently severe. And are there any other issues that we ought to be thinking about with regard to the buildings that we're managing, which are now up to 50 years old? Thanks.
Yeah. In relation to asbestos, we have a dedicated asbestos officer within the authority. As you'll be aware, I think at paragraph 15 we mentioned the compliance work. So what falls in there is continual improvement, really. So from our surveys and risk assessments, we have a programme of works every year, and it's 600k this year. And that comprises works to remove asbestos, so where it's not sort of buried in the fabric of the building where it's safe to do so. We also take opportunities when we're doing other projects to remove asbestos prior to the project, if it's present. We've had 4 HSE audits last year because they had a campaign across the UK looking at schools, and we had good outcomes on all those. So that was interviewing the head teacher, making sure they're aware, looking at our policies, procedures, management plans, that type of thing. So I think you can be reassured from an asbestos point of view, it's well managed in Leicestershire on our county schools. As far as fire safety, we are looking at property risk more than life risk. Obviously, life risk will be addressed straight away, so it's many issues around life. So fire compartmentation improvements are ongoing, but that's more about property risk. And as you may be aware, we've got our sprinkler policy. So all new schools and major extensions have to comply with our sprinkler policy in Leicestershire, which obviously can add cost, but again, that was raised, I think, post Grenfell. I think Cabinet agreed that. So that's another thing that we do in Leicestershire. I think Derby obviously had some fires last year. Legionella, again, there's a program that works across a number of schools, and that can be reducing tanks that are oversized and things like that, and pipe work, those kind of things. So I think you can be assured that from a compliance point of view, we've got a small compliance team, we've got a Legionella specialist in-house, we've got an asbestos specialist, we've got 2 fire safety officers, and we also offer trading services to other public sector authorities and district and parish councils as well.
I hope that reassures you, Mr. Hunt. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Jane mentioned about city establishments that have got issues. Can I just check that we would reciprocate with help to those establishments?
Yes, if needed, we would do. In fact, the city have managed to resolve the issues themselves through utilising some other buildings that they've got within their establishment. I have been in close contact with the director in the city over some of the issues, and there hasn't been the opportunity for us to provide accommodation for them or support for them. But indeed, if we needed to, then of course we would. That they have managed to contain it within the city by moving children to either different buildings or putting mitigation within the buildings as well. But we're working closely, not just across the 2 authorities, but across the region as well.
Thank you very much. I feel we've had I don't see any more hands. I think we've had a very good discussion, and I think on the whole we can be reassured that between all the officers sitting around this table, we have everything that we possibly can under control, and we should be very pleased that we have our schools at this time are safe and the children are safe as well. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much, Ted. And we will now move on to item 10, which is the Q1 2023-24 performance report. And this is a report by Sharon Cook and Alison Bradley. Welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. If I start, and then we'll pass over to Alison to add any comments about the early years or education data. So this is a regular report that's presented to the committee, and it's based on the actual data that is collated, performance data that's collated, linked to the priority areas in the Children and Family Service Departmental Plan. So paragraph 5 tells you that from the 15 measures that are reported that have a national benchmark, where we benchmark ourselves against statistical neighbours and the England average rather, it tells you where we sit on the quartile against those figures. To note again that as a result of improvement made to the Mosaic case management system, so that's our case management system in children's social care, some performance indicators have been on a temporary basis have not been available from the system, but just to reassure that the reports from the system, while the information was bridged over and new reports needed to be built, but the service has maintained trackers and ways of ensuring that we've got that robust oversight of the data whilst we get it into the new system. But it does impact, as impacted on some of the data that's available for this purpose. So paragraph 8 down to 14 takes you through where we sit in relation to a number of indicators that were measured against nationally. So it tells you where there has been either a slight increase or decrease in our performance, but our percentage of children subject to child protection for a second or subsequent time remains similar on around the 22% mark, and that is in line with our target of where we want to be. It takes us through the percentage of re-referrals, assessments completed within 45 working days, and those children who have been on a child protection plan lasting 2 years or more. So generally, although there are 2 areas that we remain focused on, which is around children on a child protection plan for a second or subsequent time, and the percentage of re-referrals are a particular focus for us, but this provides the data of where we currently are. Paragraph 12 to 14 takes us through the care leavers data that remains very strong. So we're measured against the care leavers in suitable accommodation, those who are in education, training, employment, or training, and those young people who we keep in contact with. So paragraph 14, one of the areas that we continue to have a focus on is our child protection cases reviewed within timescales. So once we investigate a child protection issue that needs to go to a case conference, we need to get that to a conference within 15 working days. And if a child is placed on a child protection plan, we need to review that first time within 3 months and subsequently at 6 monthly intervals. So that tells us where we are with those figures. Paragraph 15 to 18, again, we've also been changing the system, the recording system around Capita and Synergy. So that is the main reporting system on data for our children and family wellbeing service from a case record system. They record on Mosaic along with children's social care. So it does tell you that there are some limitations available in this particular report due to that changeover of the service. If I hand over to Alison to take you through early years and education, then I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Sharon. I will take you through the priority area that are helping every child get the best start into their life on there. So starting with the fund in chapter 2, paragraph 20 rather, the funded early education entitlement, or referred to as fee. There was a slight decrease for the 2-year-olds and an increase for the 3-year-olds, but overall there was an increase compared to the spring term data. Over on to paragraphs 21. The primary schools with their inspections for good and outstanding remained the same to the previous quarter, and the same for the secondary schools, though overall in paragraph 23 there was a slight increase compared to the previous quarter for inspections in all schools. In paragraph 24, the percentage of applicants obtaining their first time admissions into school was higher compared to the previous quarter, and also to the previous year, and the percentage of applicants obtaining their first time preference for secondary school transfer was equally higher compared to the previous year. In paragraph 26, the number of children electively home educated, there is increasing we're increasingly seeing that there's a trend, and there was an increase from 215 students from the previous reporting period. The trend is for the same factors that were reported in other reports. It's those children who have gone through the pandemic period where parents are still choosing to take that as an option, and also a second factor where children are still experiencing some health related concerns. But we are continuing to monitor those closely. The children not in education, employment or training, there was a decrease at the end of the quarter compared to the previous period, and we'll continue to monitor that as we go through into the next quarter as well. Exclusions was slightly higher for the summer term, and again this figure is demonstrating that we are back to where we were before the 2021 period. Still not high when compared to national data. In paragraph 30, the number of children receiving at least one term fixed term suspension as a percentage of school the academic year, that has risen, and we are seeing that as a higher trend as we're moving through the academic year, and we do again continue to monitor that. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Taylor, did you want to come back at this time? No. Martin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the report. My point is on point 30, the fixed term exclusions. I think I'm quite passionate about this subject. I think the effect of fixed term exclusions on children is quite profound. And I think the use of them is starting to become not what it was meant for. The government guidance on this is actually fantastic. Some of the best work the DfE's done, if anybody wants to read this, I'm sure people are aware of it, on fixed term exclusions is really, really brilliant. And what it does is it safeguards children from the excessive use of fixed term exclusions. I would like us to be really, really robust about the accountability of schools using these. I think that the legislative requirements of schools to provide the education when they're sent home, to, an exclusion counts if you just say, can you come and pick your child up, please? The reintegration meetings that need to happen. All of these stuff that this legislation actually is really, really robust on, and the government guidance is really excellent on, I don't feel is being used in Leicestershire schools as well as it can be. And a 50% increase in fixed term exclusions, I think, is a really worrying trend. The effect, again, that it has on the children is really quite profound. The other legislation that it mentions in this thing is obviously the SEND Code of Practice and the Children and Families Act, which has a lot of sway on the use of fixed term exclusions. So my question is what can we do to get this number down? How can we hold the schools accountable to do what they need to do with the excellent legislation that's in place? Because I think the legislation's there, but maybe the implementation isn't quite there at the moment. Sorry for speaking so passionately about it, but it really is something that I feel very strongly about for the kids in Leicestershire to not be being put through this unnecessarily.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. And again, I acknowledge your passion there, and equally, we do work to make sure that we are monitoring that. I would say that we do get a lot of schools where they do use the fixed term or suspension guidance appropriately, and it's used as a window of opportunity to make sure that something is different and is changed when they go back. There is more of a challenge where that's not, but we are make sure we try to put those robust processes into place to challenge the school to make sure that we're avoiding a permanent exclusion as well. Alongside that, it does continue to be a challenge, and we do continue to review how we can reorganise services to address that. We have this year put more emphasis into our secondary education inclusion partnership and have more of an in-reach into schools to be able to make sure that we're in at the earliest possible moment. But we do have good communications with all of our secondary schools where there is that risk of having to apply a suspension as opposed to looking at other alternatives in there. But it does remain a challenge that we keep well monitored.
Thank you. Once again, I find it very difficult when we talk percentages. So when it says it's 2.47, do we know how many children that is? Because, and this is one thing, I'm not necessarily asking for exact figures now, but it just, out of the whole number of children in education in the county, and it's 2.47. I mean, I agree that fixed term suspensions are very difficult, but it doesn't really give us an indication of numbers so much. So if that could be looked in at some time when we do this report again, numbers are always helpful. When we use percentages, 100% of nothing is nothing. And I have to say that I've raised this across the county council because percentages are great, but unless you have a base figure they're fairly meaningless to the layperson. But thank you very much. Mr.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. Fascinated by what Mr. Martin says there. I previously have worked in inclusion, pupil referral units and behavioural partnerships. I know the type of learners that we actually take on board. I also know the efforts, and sometimes the considerable efforts, that the schools go to make sure that the learner stays within the institution. Question I want to ask really, and it's a piece of work for all of us, is it exclusively the school's accountability to make sure that that learner stays in there? Are we doing things with parents? Because quite a lot of the excluded young people, if that's who we're talking about here particularly, a lot of it is based on home life, behaviour, cultures, and I can imagine that those figures have been exasperated by things like COVID, where it's a return to learning. Just wondering, are we actually holding the schools exclusively accountable, or actually are we getting buy-in from the parents to see what their angle is, see if there's any more that can be done with them? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Frisby. I would agree with your sentiments there, and where I was putting the response back, that we are going back to the schools and working closely, and where we've got good relationships with the schools, that would form part of the support and strategy offers, and signposting the schools if they've not already been signposted by other avenues of support to work with the families and other professionals as well, because it's not always the local authority, it might be other colleagues that are involved in terms of that, and we know there are challenges and demands on other services as well, but we do make sure that we're putting the appropriate support into families as well where that is highlighted as an area of need.
Thank you. Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Chair. This is a second percentage-based question for you. I'm sure there's a simple answer to this, but I'm just not sure what it is. In summer 2023, 74.6% of 2-year-olds took up their funded early education entitlement, whereas in the spring term it was 90.1%. So there's quite a big drop-off for that. So I was wondering what the cause of that was. Also, I raised this earlier, but for 3-year-olds, it said the figure was 101.2%, which I don't think is quite possible. So I was wondering if we had the actual figure for that.
Thank you, Chair.
So I can pick up the 101% question, and I'll hand over to Alison around the drop in fee, if that's okay. We think it's an error, Mr. Hill. We have had a transfer of information from one system to another, and so we think it's an error. We think it's probably around about 94%, but we'll update members and rectify it, but we don't think it is 101%, as you pointed out, but thank you.
Note that I didn't actually mention the figure on that. It was there just to move over that one quickly. So sorry, I should have highlighted that as well. In terms of that drop with the 2-year-old figure on there, I think we are noticing a trend around that 2-year-old kind of data, and the service themselves are doing a piece of work to look at why parents are not always taking up that offer as well, and whether it might be to do with employment, choice of opportunities, different, etc. So, and having had the period through the pandemic where people have been able to make home arrangements, it may have impacted onto that as well.
Mr. Martin, you wanted to come back.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point around like the multi-agency approach to children that are deteriorating. I think it's completely vital, like you say. But on the point of increased fixed term exclusions, if somebody has a very troubled home life, the last thing in the world you want to be doing is sending them home more. And I think that is one of the things that we sort of need to think and consider, and I'll go back to the legislation and guidance is absolutely excellent on this, and it talks about children with child protection plans that are being suspended, it talks about children with EHCPs, and it talks about children with the unchilded need plans, and I think that multi-agency approach is vital, but of the numbers of using this as a strategy, I think it's not a very good strategy, from my personal opinion, of sending children home when they're struggling, maybe at home or socially, or in a holistic view of that child's life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frisby.
Sorry, Chair, I'll be very, very quick. As a teacher myself before, sometimes you have no option but to get them out of the classroom. I'm sorry, Mr. Martin, but the detrimental effect that it can have on broader teaching and learning is absolutely destructive, and it is quite often the last thing that anybody who's invested in teaching wants to do, but sometimes you are given absolutely no choice. You have literally got a grenade in the classroom. Excuse the definition, but thank you anyway.
Thank you very much. I see no more hands. Mrs. Taylor or any of the officers, did you want to come back with anything else on this matter?
No, just to confirm, I take your report on board as well about the percentages. Numbers are a lot more helpful. And I think we did say that before, didn't we? But this comes through as officers speak sometime and they know the figures and we don't. So yeah, we'll definitely take that on board.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And we now move on to item 11, which is the Children's Social Care Statutory Complaints and Compliments Annual Report. This is an annual report. We're bringing Simon Parsons in on this, the Complaints and Information Manager, which will present the item. This is a very long report, and I appreciate time is marching on. So I would like, obviously, Simon to highlight certain things to us if he could, and then along with Jane. But other than that, I would encourage members, if you've got anything specific you would like to raise, fine. But we have still got another couple of items, and we're on the way to 4 o'clock already. So if I may, Jane, can I go straight to Simon? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and give a brief overview of this. So ordinarily I'd present the annual report on children's social care complaints, but this year's slightly different at a request of the Scrutiny Commission earlier in the year to also include headline sort of findings and themes around the education complaints, given a significant increase in a couple of areas, which I'll touch on shortly. So that's the reason for both being in the report this year. I'll start with social care. Social care across the board represents as a fairly stable position. Overall numbers, very slight reduction when I look at in the round across complaints that were handled under the statutory social care process and the corporate area. So very slight decrease, which bucks the wider trend generally around that. Where we are seeing an increase is escalation rates through that. So there is more going through the more costly stage 2, stage 3 process, including a couple where that's been simply because we haven't completed resources in time at stage 1. So there's an area, a bit of work around to do on that, but generally presents as a stable picture there. So that's the key message there. Also good to see that it's remained fairly healthy numbers that where we're picking up complaints directly from young persons, either directly or with advocacy. That figure, the statutory complaints process should be designed entirely to ensure their views are coming through, but it's often quite difficult to see that picture. So anything around the 10% and above ratio of complaints being from young people is relatively healthy. So 6 coming through, just to put the numbers on that for you. In terms of timescales, I mentioned before, there have been some challenges through the year on that, it's fair to say, and our timescales are down from previous year, with 31 complaints responded to within the statutory maximum. So and that's running at about just under 40%, so a drop from last year. So there is work to do on that. That's not always directly just a result of delay within the service. There can be a number of good reasons within that. So requests for meetings or other forms of conciliation measures, which wouldn't be discouraged. So, but a bit of work to do. Again, it's a mixed bag, if I'm honest. Some areas really hot. Some areas we see no issues with response timescales. Other areas a little bit more patchy, and it tends to be where those pressures are around the stability of the team and of managers and indeed workers within that. That tends to be behind the variances there, I think. In terms of ombudsman activity on a social care front, the ombudsman investigated 10 complaints, finding fault in 3 instances, so relatively low numbers, and that reflects well that by and large complaints are resolved appropriately before they escalate to the Ombudsman. Financial payments of 2,500 coming through there, mostly in one case that was around, which was a tricky case and a long one that's really a continuation for a couple of years. 11 compliments received. As I say, a bit of work to do just to make sure we're probably picking up all of those, but good to see at least some coming through there. I'll move on to corporate complaints, and really just to highlight two areas coming through in significant volumes for the department there. School admissions, after a couple of calm years, saw a spike last year, all very focused around a very specific theme around delays in dealing with midterm transfer applications, which saw a spate of complaints come through. Lots of work going on to improve the position in that area, fundamentally about resource levels and mixed in with some capacity challenges at various points around the county. And the other area, special educational needs, which I think members will be aware has some significant challenges both nationally and locally around that area. And again, a challenging year there. Again, mostly around delay at various stages through the process. Although there are also issues around just making sure that we're on top of cases where children are outside of education and making sure we're meeting our Section 19 education duties in terms of getting alternate provision in on a timely basis. Those are kind of the two main themes, coming through from the SEN side of things. So I think that's the main points to bring up, Chair, conscious of time, so I'll pause there. And
thank you very much, Simon. I see no hands at the moment. Mrs. Taylor, did you want to come back at all? Jane?
Yeah, just to add a couple of things, really, and thank you, Simon, for it. I think it's a really helpful, comprehensive report. Obviously, we are aware within the department of the significant levels of complaints that came in over two areas predominantly, particularly around the corporate complaints, both within school admissions and special educational needs. We do continue to have challenges within special educational needs around the timeliness of assessment, which is causing great understandable concern for parents and carers and also schools as well. But we are working hard to look to kind of reduce the timeframes for that and indeed undertake assessments at the right time. In relation to the school admission service, we did see a significant peak last year in terms of complaints. We're confident this year that we have resolved the issues that led to the challenges that parents experienced and then led to complaints. So we've got around about 90,000 children across Leicestershire who are of school age, and obviously we have a duty to make sure that they have a school place and are given a school place within the right timeframes. We did have some significant issues last year that then led to this spike, and indeed that 30% of overall volume. But we're confident as we move and are now in this term that we've resolved those issues, so shouldn't see the levels of complaints that we experienced last year.
Thank you very much. I also was pleased to see that the notification went out from the media department that the date is approaching fast for people to register for September 2024. And I think sometimes some of the complaints because of admissions, I think as much publicity, and it's beholden on us counsellors and everybody else to encourage people to start thinking about this, and if not applying their admissions. And I think also there's sometimes a problem when you ask for 3 and they give 1 selection, which is sometimes understandable, but it's not helpful to anybody. So I'm pleased to see. I think is it from just later this month that they can start applying for 2024?
Yes, so we've opened applications for both primary and secondary schools. So the secondary school applications close on the 31st of October and the primary is the 15th of January. And you're absolutely right. We've been really clear in our media that we'd encourage parents and carers to select up to 3 schools to make sure that they can get the best possible chance of a close local school for their children. And we've included that in all of the publicity.
Very much. Mrs. Taylor.
Just to add to that as well about school catchment areas, every school has their own catchment area, so people that are applying have to make sure they put a catchment school on there as well, and they can check the school's website to make sure they are, because we've had quite a bit of people that are quite near to one school but they're not actually in the catchment area for that school, so it's really important that parents check their catchment schools as well.
And thank you, Sam. Mr. Martin.
Just want to say thank you for the way that the local authority deals with complaints. I think obviously I spend a lot of my time with parents, and there is a lot of complaints in Senna, and the issues fundamentally surrounding why they're complaining is probably slightly separate to my point here. It's always taken seriously. It always gets a response from the appropriate person at the correct level, and it's always explained what your next steps are for recourse. Nobody always agrees, but I think the local authority has a very good process in place for that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So well done all. Thank you very much. And we now move on to item 12, which is the final report today, and it's the Leicestershire and Rutland Local Safeguarding Children's Partnership Annual Report. This is another annual report and can be found on pages 83 to 116. And I believe, Jane, you're leading us through this.
Thank you, Chair. So the report that you have got in front of you presents the draft annual report of the Leicestershire and Rutland Children's Safeguarding Partnership for 22-23. The purpose of the annual report is to assess the impact of the work undertaken by the partnership in 22-23 on safeguarding outcomes for children in Leicestershire and Rutland, and it specifically evaluates the performance against priorities that were set out in the business plan for that year. The draft annual report is appended to this report, and it outlines the learning, the assurance and the training and improvement activity of the partnership and its partners, and the impact that this has had on safeguarding children across Leicestershire and Rutland. The key messages from the partnership specifically in relation to Leicestershire are detailed in paragraph 11. I won't go through them in detail because I'm sure members have read the report, but we've pulled out there some of the specific or key messages from the report. The committee is asked to consider the annual report and make comments or proposed additions or amendments to the report that can be then addressed prior to the final version being published. The report does include a summary of the consultation and engagement work that we've undertaken through the partnership with children and young people, and you'll see from the report there are several quotes from children as well throughout the report. And the annual report is being presented to Cabinet on the 15th of September. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jane. So if anybody wants to read it again today, as long as they get it through to you, say by the beginning of next week, it can be amended if necessary or added to. Right, I don't see any hands. So thank you very much indeed. And thank everybody very much for attending today. The next meeting of this committee is on the 7th of November. And I would like to thank everybody very much indeed. Item 14 is stated at the start of the meeting. I have no urgent items, but thank you very much for your time. And the sun is still shining, so safe journey home. Thank you.